Good to see everybody out this morning. We're picking up our study this morning in the book of Acts. We'll be looking chapter 16 this morning, and we're picking up down in and around verses 19, 20 in that area right there. But before we do that, let's take a look at our chapter titles this morning. And where are we on chapter 2? All right. 3 and 4? All right, first persecutions. 1? Jesus' ascension. All right. 9? Conversion of who? All right. Chapter 5? Death of Ananias and Sapphira. 6 and 7? Stephen's arrested. I can see the wheels turning clear up here. This is good. This is good. Chapter 8, conversion of. All right. 10, conversion of. Cornelius. All right. Chapter 11. All right. Christians first in Antioch. 12. Persecutions of Judea. Good. 13 and 14. Paul's first journey. Good. 15. Jerusalem conference. Good. 16. Conversion of Philippian jailer. There you go. All right. 16 chapters. You guys are doing this. This is good. This is good. All right. This morning, what we want to do is take a look. Paul is still in Philippi. This is where we left him Wednesday evening. All right. And he's still there. We haven't moved him. He's still there. But as a result then of his meeting, and if you remember, as he's making this journey, as he's going up through these regions, he's not allowed to, the Holy Spirit doesn't want him to go into Bithynia, into Asia, and he's got a straight track leading from Troas. And who we said joined him in Troas? Who? Who joined him in Troas? Timothy was already with him. Timothy was with him out of Lystra. Who joined him with him? When all we did was picked it up on the little word of we. Luke. There you go. Luke joined him at Troas. Okay, and we're going to see something out of that too hopefully before the day's over. And they go on to Philippi. Now, we remember that there was some definite plan here. God didn't want him to alter his trip. And we're going to see that this morning. And there's up until I put this lesson together this morning, I didn't see the magnitude of what's going on here. But there's a special situation occurring in Philippi now that we want to make note of. Okay, we've already talked about, we've seen that he's met with Lydia and everything that took place there. She's a seller of purple. We talked about her background a little bit of Jewish descent. And she's out by the riverside. There's no synagogue in Philippi at this time, her and her household. And she listens to Paul's words and obeys what's taking place. And all that starts. And we talked about now, we've got Christians now established in Philippi. Keep that thought in mind, because this is going to get better as the rest of the chapter unfolds. Okay? For some very key events that take place. All right, so as all this begins to happen and all this takes place, let me get down here to about, all right, we get to verse 16. There's an interesting situation that takes place. What happens as a result of the meeting with the slave girl? Yeah. Paul has some things to do. Verse 18. It says, and she continued many days. And what was going on in verse 17, as Paul and Silas was going around, following after Paul and us, she kept crying out, saying, these are the men, bondservants of the Most High God, who are proclaiming to you the way of salvation. Now, what's wrong with that?
To me, if she's possessed with a demon, why is that demon letting her say that?
Well, this is a good point. Nick, where are you, buddy? Read for me, Mark, that passage I give you. Mark chapter 1, verses 23 to 26. Listen to what takes place here. This is interesting.
Now there was a man in there, Synuge, with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, let us alone. What have we to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth? Did you come to destroy us?
Okay, all right. Jesus is in and out of the synagogues as he normally did. This man is having a conversation. This man with unclean spirit. Jesus recognizes the unclean spirit. The spirit recognizes Jesus. Same thing that just takes place here. Jesus didn't tolerate something that was not pure, let's call it, something that was unholy, if you will, like this unclean spirit, and the same situation as with Paul here, right here now. Didn't tolerate that being hooked up with something very pure and very spiritual as the message of God, and like that. And he just says, get out of here. And that's exactly what takes place. Now, it's not about the girl. It's not about the slave girl. And we have I have a real difficult time of getting my head around something occupying me that I can't control. Something inside of me controlling my being that that has control. Like this unclean. We have a difficult time identifying with that because we just, as far as I know, don't experience that today. Okay, go ahead. Huh?
Dementia is a little bit similar.
Similar? Yeah, go ahead.
Could this been done in such a way to where it just been a taunt?
Could have been a what?
A taunting, just to aggravate. You can say something that's right and do it in such a way to where it's belittling.
The only thing that I would say no to that is because because Paul and this spirit has a conversation. Paul knows that it's a spirit that's in her that's doing that. And he tells it plainly to come out, and it does. So it's not the girl. It's
I'm
not
saying it's
yeah.
girl, but the evil spirit could be doing it.
Sure,
as a taunt.
sure, that could have been, and in that regard, sure, and in that regard, there's no tolerance for that. Paul doesn't want anything unclean, nor did Jesus, as Nick just read in Mark. They wanted nothing to contaminate the message that's being presented. And so it's eliminated. It's just told to leave, and it does. And that's what takes place. And so the interesting part about it is then what happens as a result of this. What happens as a result of Paul casting out or telling this spirit to leave, and it does. What happens then?
Her master's got mad
Yeah. Why?
because she gave him great wealth.
Somehow, and again, Luke doesn't tell us the details, okay? But somehow, in what she was able to do in some magical hocus pocus, okay, it was presumed or thought of by the people that this slave girl has some sort of magic trick, magic way of telling fortune or doing whatever. Okay. Anyway, it's done in such a way that the masters understand that it's gone. When this spirit leaves the girl, that capability that she had is no longer there. And they become very upset and very disturbed about what takes place. Now, I find it very interesting. Now, hold on, let me get things situated here just a minute. But I find it very interesting as they become upset with what takes place, that when they decide to arrest them, and let's just take a look at this because there's some interesting things that's said here. Because verse 19, and when the masters saw that their hope of profit was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them to the marketplace before the authorities. And when they brought them before the chief magistrates, listen to what takes place here. Now, why is it that they become upset? Because their livelihood, I mean, however this person was creating money for them is gone. That's what happened. Listen to what's said. Okay? And when they had brought them before the magistrates, they said, these men are throwing our city into confusion, being Jews, and are proclaiming customs which are not lawful for us to accept, nor to observe, being Romans. Really? Is that what was said? No. Absolutely not. This is a flat-out lie. Okay? And so the stress, or what they What they become upset about isn't what's presented. Okay? Isn't what's presented. Now watch what takes place. And the crowd rose up together against them, and the chief magistrates tore their robes off of them and proclaimed and proceeded and ordered them to be beaten with rods. Now, I want to give us a little information about that. Because most likely, and please understand, in this kangaroo court system that just happened here, okay, Paul and Silas aren't allowed to defend themselves. They aren't allowed to say a thing. The magistrates just come unglued and order a beating to take place. Now let me tell you, this beating that they allowed to take place, a lot of people died under. They never made it through it. Okay? Because what this means is, most likely the men, we'll call them, they're Roman representatives, and they were called, and I'll spell this for you, Lictors, and you can pronounce it, I pronounce it lictors, Lictors. These were Roman goons, okay, that accompanied magistrates, and their sole purpose in life was to let people see that they were Roman authorities. They were Roman representatives, and you toe the line or we're going to fix it. And most of the time, these were big guys. They were guys that you wouldn't want to mess with anywhere. And they're the ones that administer this beating because they wanted it administered in such a way to leave no doubt that Rome's in control. To leave no doubt they are in control. And so they are the ones that administer, more than likely, the ones that administer this punishment to Paul in the beating of these rods. Now, what that simply meant, if you look up what rods mean, it's a Greek word that means a bundle of, and most of the time it was elm sticks tied together, laced together, and you were beat with those things. And most of the time, like I said, a lot of people never lived through it because Rome didn't care. If you lived, if you died, that's fine. We don't care. So, but in this particular case, and I wanted to also let us understand and remember too, and we've made reference, when Paul talks about the things that he's endured for the cause of Christ in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 25, 3 times he lists being beaten with rods. This is the only one that we have record of as far as I know, where rods are explicitly said and used. 3 times he endured that. Let me tell you, you're busted up. You're broke up. You've got broke ribs. You've got, I mean, if you live through this thing, you suffer the result of it. Okay? And so 3 times he endures this, and this is what takes place. And so the beating takes place, and as a result of that then, and when they inflicted, verse 23, many blows upon them, they threw them in the prison, commanding the jailer to guard them securely. So that's exactly what takes place. The jailer puts them in jail. More than likely, as this would happen, their feet were fastened in stocks, verse 24. That compounded the beating. You're sit in such a way you can't lay down. Your feet are stretched out in front of you in the stocks. There is no comfort. It makes the beating you just endured even more. Okay? And so that's what takes place. Go ahead.
They weren't supposed to beat him like that without proof of the
Quit
crime.
looking at my notes. Will you just give me a minute? You're right. You're right. And this is a powerful point for this whole situation. Okay? Because the beating that takes place at midnight, verse 25, midnight Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns and praise to the Lord, and the prisoners were listening to them. And suddenly there came a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately the doors were opened, and everyone's chains were unfastened. And when the jailer had been roused out of his sleep and seen the prison doors open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, supposing the prisoners had escaped. But Paul cried with a loud voice, saying, "Do yourself no harm, for we are all here." And he called for lights, and he rushed in, trembling in fear, and fell down before Paul and Silas. And after he brought them out, he said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" There's lots of things to talk about here, okay? This is at midnight. You've got two men who have been severely beaten, singing praises to God. And at midnight, the great earthquake takes place. The doors of the prisons are open, but nobody escapes. Nobody leaves. The keeper of the jail knows in his mind his life's history. I mean, you just would assume that if this happened, everybody would scatter like crazy. But Paul says, no, we're all here. Don't do yourself any harm. And so he doesn't. And so, as a result of what takes place, the jailer and his household is converted, and all this begins to happen, but it begins to unfold a powerful point that's going to be made about this whole conversion that is very special. Okay? Let's continue. Verse 31, and they said, "Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, and you shall be saved, you and your household." And they spoke the word of the Lord to him together with all who were at his house. And he took them at very hour of the night and washed their wounds. And immediately he was baptized and all his household. And he brought them into his house and set food before them and rejoiced greatly. Hold on. And rejoiced greatly, having believed in God and with his whole household. And when day came, the chief magistrate sent their policemen saying, "Release these men." Let's stop there just a second. Because it's important for us to understand that the jailer is genuinely touched with what takes place and wants to do something to fix it. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
There in 33, there where he took and washed the strap. Danklin took the beat, and Paul and Silas took the beat, and he says they washed it. Says and he took them the same early night and washed the straps and was baptized.
Right. He tries to administer whatever help he can give to them for the beating.
They had been beat.
Yeah. Paul and Silas had. Paul and Silas. They had been beat.
He took Paul and Silas, washed their straps, and then he got baptized.
Right.
Well, I know, but
That's what it says.
but most people would take this right here, and it sounds like that they had been beat.
Well, most people don't study on
That's why we're talking about this morning. That's why we're here. But Paul and Silas have been beat badly, and the jailer knows that, and in whatever way he can to help make amends for it, that's what he does. Okay, that's what he does. And it makes sense. I mean, when you understand what takes place, and see what takes place, it makes sense for him to do that. And he does. But the interesting part about it is what happens after that. Okay, and we want to touch base on that because this is really, really cool and crucial to what's going to be the work here, what takes place. And when they get word, verse 35, to release these men, and the jailer reported these words to Paul, saying, "The chief magistrates have sent to release you. Now therefore come out and go in peace." Watch. Here's the Roman trump card. Okay, here's the Roman trump card. Verse 37, and Paul said to them, "They have beaten us publicly, without trial, men who are Romans." Now, if you just had any kind of indication what you've just done, you just died. Because you have stepped in something here big time bad, and you've messed up. "And they have thrown us into prison, and now are sending us away secretly? No, indeed. But let them come themselves and bring us out." And the policemen reported these words to the chief priests, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Romans. And they came and appealed to them. And when they were brought them out, they kept begging for them to leave the city, no doubt, okay? And they went out of the prison and entered the house of Lydia. And when they saw the brethren, they encouraged them and departed. Now, a couple of key things here. As we said before, as they've moved to Philippi, they've had God's guidance to get there. Lydia's household's been converted. The Philippian jailer's now converted, and his household's converted. We have a church in Philippi. Why is that important? One reason. The first reason, on the third journey in Acts chapter 20, Paul's going to return here. there is a relationship established here with these folks between this congregation and Paul that's very, very, very special. Okay? He not only revisits them again later on in the book of Acts, he pens an entire book of Philippians. He pens that book to this church and writes it to them. And in that book, over in, I believe, in Philippians, I think it's the last chapter, chapter 3, I believe, chapter 4, and down about verse 15, and he says, "You yourselves also know, Philippians, that at the first preaching of the gospel, after I departed from Macedonia, no church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving, but you." There was a relationship established here between the folks in Philippi and Paul that was long-lasting. And it was near and dear to his heart. He was near and dear to their heart, in that there was communications back and forth between them and him, and keeping him supported, keeping him going with the things that he needed. And he returned then the benefit of that, and coming back by to see them again on his third journey as well. So there is a relationship established here in this meeting that's very, very special. But as important as all that was to Paul, the biggest single signal that's sent out of here is to the magistrates in Philippi. Most of the folks who lived in Philippi were Gentiles. Okay? So don't mess with them. Don't be playing your games with them. Because unless you're playing the game right. If under Roman law, if you were arrested and you went through the due process, as we call it, and you were guilty, that was one thing. But don't be arresting people and beating people and throwing them into prison with no trial, with no understanding of what's going on here, except a couple of hotheads who lost the power of a slave girl. You can't just do that. And so the big signal is sent to the authorities: don't mess with these folks unless you've got good reason to be doing what you're doing, because it's not lawful and it's not right. So there's a big message that's sent here. And of course, the church at Philippi benefits as a result of what takes place here with these folks. So it's a powerful lesson and a powerful meaning for why the Lord wanted Paul to get to Macedonia, get to Philippi on a direct course to getting there. So it's interesting reading. There's also one other little tidbit in the very last part of the verse 40 that Luke shares with us that I wanted you to pick up on. Because as they returned to Lydia's house, in verse 40, and when they saw the brethren, they encouraged them and departed. Who stayed in Philippi? Who stayed in Philippi? Luke. They departed. We sailed from Troas on. You remember that part where we got the we? Now he says they departed. And Luke stays in Philippi. See, what I want us to understand is just because Paul leaves, and we've said this on other occasions, just because Paul and Silas leave, that don't mean the problems go away. That doesn't mean the pressure goes away. That doesn't mean there doesn't guidance and support and teaching that needs to be done. And Luke stays. Luke stays in Philippi to keep that work going. I mean, it's brand new people, brand new Christians, brand new church established, and he's there and left there to continue the work as Paul then moves on. Okay? Little things that Luke tells us that we can run right by if we're not careful. But when he says they encouraged them and departed, Luke stayed. Luke stayed as they went on. Okay? Thoughts about chapter 16?
It's just neat how all these little intricate stories just fit together for all the purpose, to put this big puzzle together. And I was just thinking how the jailer really is getting ready to take his life there when he thought people escaped, but once all that's passed,
Exactly. And you think about his background. How did he know to ask the question, what do I need to do to be saved? Well, I mean, he could have picked up some teaching from before this. We don't know. Luke doesn't share that with us. We don't know, okay? So it's all speculation on our part. Heard the singing going on before he went to sleep that night? I mean, there's just all kinds of possibilities that it could have had enough for him to understand that he needed to ask the question of what I need to do to get things fixed here. And it's not a physical thing. I mean, him asking what I needed to do to be saved wasn't looking at what I need to do to save my physical life, because otherwise I'm going to die here losing prisoners. That wasn't his thought. His thought was, what do I need to do to fix my spiritual relationship here? And he does. And Paul's recognized that, teaches him what he needs to know, and he and his family and his household are baptized. Take a look at what this looks like. When you take a look at all these, let me just put them up here so you can see them. The Great Commission, Matthew 28, talks about preaching and teaching, and that's exactly what Paul and Silas did in speaking the word of God. The jailer believed on the Lord. Repentance. And this gets back to what you were talking about, John. He can't fix the beating. The beating's done. The damage is done.
What about me about, just this one saying like that, you can study all you want to, and you don't feel nothing but that, after how much you
Right.
You have to make that young.
Sure.
I done noticed that they baptized him, they didn't baptize, he didn't baptize the apostles, I know that.
No. The idea is that they present to him what he needs to hear, and there you go. And so he does what he can do to help them over what they've just endured. Nothing he can do but put the Band-Aids on and wrap them up and do whatever to try to help out. The damage is done. Okay, so that's what he does. And he's baptized. He and his household were baptized, shall be saved, filled with joy, with now believing in God, and we've got an unbelievable beginning for the church there in Philippi, as it has its beginning here in Acts 16. Go ahead.
He had seen the power of God when the doors were open, the check was released. He knew something was going on.
That's an excellent point. I mean that just don't happen. I mean, like I said, 99% of the time the door's open, these guys are going to be running out of there as hard as they can go. You're absolutely right. It's a great point. Good point. Mm-hmm.
I got to show you right there. With God, through Jesus Christ, nothing shall be impossible.
Exactly. All things are possible. You bet. You bet. Good point. Yeah.
They had to go through 3 gates,
Here. I'm not sure about 3 here. I know Peter did when he come out of the prison. I know you're right there in that account, but I don't know that it tells us that here. But anyway, it's an incredible story and account, and I have a much more better appreciation for the urgency that Paul had to get to Philippi, because of what the long-term effect would be, not only for the folks there in Philippi, but for him himself. For him himself, as he has more things that he's going to have to do as his journey continues there. Okay, so he's teaching them to observe all that's commanded, done there, and Luke remains with the group. Okay, all right. So that wraps up 16 for us here. Any thoughts or questions on chapter 16? Go ahead.
Was Lydia a Gentile?
I don't think so. Hold on. It said something about that, I thought. Hold on.
Like Cornelius, she's already a worshiper of God.
Yeah, she's already a worshiper of God. You're right. That's how it classifies her, not as a Jew or.
In verse 1 it says, certain Jewish women who believe. So would that make her a Jew?
When she and her household yeah, worshiper of God. I think. What did you say, Beth? I'm sorry.
In verse 1 it says, a certain Jewish woman who believed.
That would have been yeah, that's Timothy's. That's Timothy. You rewound too far. Yeah, that's Timothy's mom and grandma. Yeah, but Lydia picks up in verse 14. As far as that puts it into the same kind of situation we've talked about with Cornelius, where there was a sincere heart looking for the way to the Lord, and it's provided, it's shown, and given to her. But that's it. Okay, other thoughts? All right, let's take a look at the questions on chapter 16. I should have made a map for that, but I didn't. All right, okay. In what city did Paul find Timothy? Lystra. Lystra, yeah. Yeah, he's in Lystra. Okay. Verse 1. Paul also came from Derbe to Lystra, and behold, a certain disciple was there named Timothy. Verse 1.
Mine says came to Derbe.
Yeah, he came also to Derbe and to Lystra. And then you would, and we know that how do we know? So the last city is Lystra listed there. Okay, all right. Where was Paul when he saw the vision of the man from Macedonia? Troas. Okay. What city of Macedonia was a colony? Philippi. All right. Of what city was Lydia? Thyatira. That's right. We ever seen that city name before? Huh? Yes, we have. That's right. City of Asia, of one of the seven of Asia. That's right. Of what was Lydia's occupation? Seller of purple. We talked about that a little bit. What miracle did Paul work in Philippi? Yeah, casting out that spirit of divination. Okay. Who prevented the jailer's suicide? Paul. Okay. How long did the jailer and his family delay their baptism? It was delayed, all right? Why were the magistrates fearful concerning Paul and Silas? They were Romans uncondemned. That was a huge, huge deal. Was Timothy's circumcision necessary for salvation? No. We talked about that. What was the spirit of divination? Like a fortune teller. There you go. That's right. Like a fortune teller. All right. What was a magistrate? Yeah. In this case, particularly a Roman representative as well for that city.
Kind of a judge too,
Mm-hmm. Yep. What was the significance of Paul and Silas being Roman citizens? Right. I mean, they couldn't be in prison as a Roman citizen without a trial. That was the big thing, among others. And there was also certain things that went with that too. You couldn't be crucified. There was some things you could not happen to you as being a Roman. Other things could, but the real severe things had to go through the process to make it work if you're a Roman citizen. Why was the jailer about to kill himself when he thought that the prisoners had escaped?
He's gonna be killed anyway.
Right. That's right. The penalty for letting a prisoner go was your life. That's right. That's right. All right. There's a whole bunch of things here listed there as the cities, and I did not make a map to show you, but I think we've gone through enough of them. We know Lystra, Derbe, Lystra, Iconium, Pergia, Galatia, Mysia, and Bithynia. We had that on the map. Troas, Macedonia. We've looked at all of these. I should have put a map together to put them all back up there for you, but we've looked at all of them and seen them. So, all right, timing's looking good this morning. We're just about there. We'll wrap up, I think, this morning and call this chapter 16. We'll get into 17 and on Wednesday evening as this journey continues on. Other thoughts or questions now? Anything related to this as we stop here this morning? All right, we appreciate it. Thanks so much for your help.